Here's my presentation about The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. So first I just want to give a brief overview of the book, and I would like to first explain that the book defines a hot zone as an area that contains lethal infectious organisms, which I will discuss the significance of later. This book is also about the Ebola virus and mentions three variants in the book. The first variant is called Ebola Marburg, the second variant is Ebola Zaire, and the last variant is Ebola Reston. Richard Preston, who's the author of this book, also interviews the characters and describes what they're going through in great detail. And lastly, this is also a real story, which I will also explain later the significance of. Moving on to the major plot points of the story. And first, I'd like to say that all the pictures that I used are actual pictures that were in the book, like of the setting. And you can see in the first picture, there's a mountain which is called Mount Elgon, and a man named Charles Monet is camping there and just is exploring nature. And he later explores this cave, and after he got out of the cave, he wasn't really feeling that well, which he got onto an airplane later and flew to a hospital where he can get treated. Okay, moving on. In the first three pictures, you can see a woman, and her name's Nancy Jax, and she partners with the CDC and the Army to help research Ebola. And while they're researching Ebola, they get this shipment of monkeys in, and they don't know that they have the virus to begin with, like the Ebola virus to begin with, because they were already infected with it. And so all the monkeys spreaded their virus to all the other monkeys in the building, and then they later had to disinfect the entire building because they didn't want the virus to spread. Okay, and finally, you can see that on the left, you can see a man, and that's Richard Preston, who's the author. And he goes back to the mountain that Charles Monet was on, and also he goes to the cave, and he just makes more discoveries about Ebola and why it originated there. Okay, moving on to my themes. The first major theme that I identified is helping others is just as important as helping yourself. And the reason why I chose this theme is because Nancy Jax, who I earlier just mentioned, she gives up her time to research the Ebola virus, and she also is a volunteer, so she isn't receiving any money for it. And she also has kids and a husband that she has to take care of, and she also works really long hours. I remember in some instances in the book, she didn't go to bed until 1 a.m. and then would have to wake up at 4 a.m. the next day, which just shows her dedication. The next theme that I identified is being healthy should not be taken for granted. And the reason why I chose this theme is because the characters who are infected with Ebola have taken their time while they were healthy for granted. And I also feel like a lot of people do that in real life too, is take their time while they were healthy for granted, which is just a major lesson that people should learn. Okay, moving on to my key passages. In the first major key passage that I identified, on page 17 it states, "He is holding an air sickness bag over his mouth. He coughs a deep cough and regurgitates something into the bag. The bag swells up. Perhaps he glances around, and then you see that his lips are smeared with something slippery and red, mixed with black specks as if he'd been chewing coffee grounds. His eyes are the color of rubies, and his face is an expressionless mass of bruises. The red spots, which a few days before had started out as star-like speckles, have expanded and merged into huge, spontaneous purple shadows. His whole head is turning black and blue. The muscles of his face droop. The connective tissue in his face is dissolving, and his face appears to hang from the underlying bone as if his face is detaching from the skull. He opens his mouth and gasps into the bag, and the vomiting goes on endlessly. It will not stop, and he keeps bringing up liquid after his stomach should have been empty. The air sickness bag fills to the brim with a substance known as vomito negro, or the black vomit. The black vomit is not really black. It is speckled liquid of two colors, black and red, a stew of tarry granules mixed with fresh red arterial blood. It is a hemorrhage and smells like a slaughterhouse." So the reason why I chose this as my key passage is it highlights the significance of Ebola can have on people. Uh, and this in the key passage that I identified just are a few of the symptoms that come along with Ebola. And later this creates fear in the public. And in this instance, Charles Monet, he was on the airplane flying to the hospital, and since people are so close to each other on airplanes, this probably could have meant that he could have spreaded it to other people. Okay, moving on to my next key passage on page 347, the book states, "She woke up early. She woke up Jerry and told him that her father would probably die today. She knew she would have to go home, but should she try to fly home today? She could arrive in Wichita by afternoon and she might still arrive. She might be able to have a last farewell with him. She decided not to fly home. She felt that she couldn't leave her job in the middle of the Reston crisis, that it would be a dereliction of her post." So the reason why I chose this as my key passage is this is Nancy Jacks, by the way, and she still dedicates her time to Ebola even though her father's dying. And at first, when I was reading this, I thought that she didn't really like her father because she didn't want to visit him. And later, she attends his funeral and she's just bursting in tears, and it just really shows that she still appreciates her father, and also is also trying to research Ebola at the same time. Okay, moving on to my last key passage. On page 140, the book states, "Jean felt a prickling sensation on his scalp. The paths of Charles Monet and Peter Cardinal had only crossed at one place on Earth, and that was inside Kittim Cave. What had they done in the cave? What had they found in there? What had they touched? What had they breathed? What lived in Kittim Cave?" So, since Charles Monet died of Ebola after exploring the cave and Peter has been showing Ebola symptoms, it sparked curiosity in Jean's mind about the cave and why people were getting Ebola while they were in the cave. This was also a reason why Ebola existed in the first place, and is the reason why Ebola research was conducted in the book. Okay, moving on to Richard Preston's style. He uses a third-person omniscient point of view, and he's also very direct, and he uses examples to help the reader understand the significance of the book. On page 85, Richard Preston writes, 100 million polioviruses could cover the period of this sentence. So that is just one of the examples that he uses, which I think is an interesting part of his style. Moving on to the personal meaning of this book, I chose this book because I was really interested in biology and wanted to learn more about viruses, and this was also a New York Times bestseller. And this also made me understand more about Ebola and scientific research in general, and it also made me thankful for my own health after realizing what the consequences of Ebola were. And I would say that my favorite part is when they find the different mutations of Ebola, because many of the characters in the book are showing different symptoms, and that was just a major plot point in the book that I really enjoyed. So overall, I give this book a 9 out of 10 because of the major plot points, and also considering that this is a true story, I think it also gives so much more significance because these events actually happened in real life. And the only reason why I don't give it a 10 out of 10 is because there's a lot of unfortunate events that happen in the book, which I think was really sad.